Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio series, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder. And our program today is, well, something we hope you don't have to use, but you probably will. Today's program is Dealing with Bad News.
Usually you know right away if it's good news or bad news, but that may be the problem. Do you always know? I mean, there are many things in life we'd like to avoid and really are not able to avoid, but so much of life is about what we do with what's done to us that we thought that this would merit a whole program in and of itself. Starting with what makes the news good or bad. How do you know it's bad news? Maybe it's a blessing in disguise or one of those silver lining deals. Let's talk about that. And in any event, if it turns out to be bad or unfortunate or even disastrous, how do you make the best of a bad situation? That's our topic today.
Yeah, bad news is something that, it's interpretive. I mean, to one person, bad news is terrible, horrible, the worst ever. To somebody else, it's like a little pimple, a little bump on the log. But, there's some things that are clearly bad news when you hear about health problems, when you hear about financial problems, when you hear about things like people getting fired or getting divorced. I mean, there's things that are clearly, you could label these things as bad news. But, what we've discovered, of course, is sometimes it's the hardest stuff we go through that is the most powerful in changing us in the best ways. I know one of the worst experiences I had in terms of receiving bad news was realizing I'm having a heart attack. That was bad news. But what happened as a result of that heart attack was wonderful news. It was the silver lining. Michael was talking about sometimes the bad news is the best stuff because adversity is the diamond dust. It takes the hard stuff to shine us up. So what we want to talk about today is what do you do instantly when you receive bad news? And then how do you deal with your perception of that bad news and choosing your response to that bad news? It's not just the bad news. It's what, as Michael was saying, it's what you do with it. So the initial response to bad news for many is panic. For many is they move into this fight or flight mode where hitting or running is what the brain is adapted to do, and there's nobody to hit, there's nowhere to run. So the fight or flight response, the needing to beat something up or run away from something, although that's a very common experience when people first hear bad news, is really almost always the inappropriate response. Unless the bad news is a wild tiger just escaped right in front of you. Running and hitting is probably not what you need.
It's funny, as you just said, Steve, our fight or flight reaction to so-called bad news is usually to gather tension, muscular tension. And in addition to increasing our blood pressure and our pulse, those tight muscles and dilated pupils and amplified brainwave activity, accelerated in frequency, all of these things are part of a survival mechanism that we've inherited if the danger is real. But the muscular tension that results from that creates a holding on situation. And holding on may not be the most appropriate way to deal with something bad that's just happened. Why would you hold on to bad news? Why would you carry it around with you from place to place? Why would you parse it and dissect it and go over and over and over it if it's really bad news? Well, basically because it provides a often false sense of control. Like if I hold on to this bad news, this bad situation, and show it to people, present it, I have the illusion, as a result of this muscular tension and holding on, that I'm somehow in control, but you're really not. You're just holding on to a problem. Then, instead of realizing that we're holding on, we describe it as stuck. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago in this series, how often feeling stuck is actually holding on. So you may want to reflect as we continue through this program on how much of my experience of being stuck in life or having this bad news done to me and then stick to me as if it's holding on to me is really the result of muscular tension. Maybe I'm not only holding on in a physical sense, maybe I'm holding on mentally to my belief that this is a problem. Maybe I'm holding on emotionally. And I wouldn't even argue that holding on for a short period of time might be a good idea while you reorient yourself and examine the situation. But ultimately, why not put it down? Why not let it go? Again, you may think I'm stretching the allegory a little bit from physically holding on to something to the tenacity of a bad situation haunting me emotionally or mentally, but I think it's all part of the same process. If you feel physically like you've been attacked, holding on would be the last thing you want to do.
Holding on for a moment, as you said, just to see where am I, might be reasonable in some circumstances, but in the long run, it's never the best thing to do, especially holding on to something bad. Obviously, if there's something bad, you want to let go of it. When we hear bad news, really there are three directions we could go. Most people go one of two directions. The direction some people go is toward, well, what's the best I can make out of this? All right, now this bad thing is happening. How can I deal with it? How can I effectively handle it? What's the best I can do with this bad situation? Much more common is people go, all right, now how bad is this going to get? How bad could this possibly get? I'm worried this is bad already and it's going to get worse. And that's the autopilot, right? They're kicking in, sending you off in one of those two directions. You're going to go in one of those two directions unless you do something about it. Your autopilot is set right now from all the other times you've received bad news. You either are an optimist about it or you're a pessimist about it. And unless you do something, that's going to happen next time. So if you're one of those people who worries, then the next time you get bad news, your autopilot is going to kick you right down the line of, well, how could this even get worse? If you're an optimist, then automatically, without even thinking about it, your first thought is, okay, now what can I do about it? How can I make lemons into lemonade kind of thing? There is a third response you can have that you have to program in that doesn't come naturally for anybody, I don't believe, but it's the ability to become mindful. You hear the bad news and you have the ability to step back and observe what's going on with your thoughts and feelings without being in it. And sort of essentially like disassociating from the bad news, not disconnecting. It's still there, but you're not emotionally charged by it. You're just observing how you respond to it. Now, ideally, that would be the best way of dealing with good news, with bad news, with any kind of news, is to step back and explore the circumstance from a non-logical as well as non-emotional point of view, see the whole big picture point of view, before you make any decisions. But take a look at your autopilot response now. What happens when you receive bad news? You have a lifetime of history letting you know if when you receive bad news, is your instinct, not really truly the right word, but is your autopilot set on going toward what could get worse, or is your autopilot set on what could get better? And if you want to reprogram that autopilot setting, it's really not that difficult to do.
I think an attitude of victimization is something we also need to talk about. A friend of mine recently got a diagnosis of cancer, and her daughter responded by saying, "Why do these things always happen to me?" Well, wait a minute, it's your mother that got the cancer. Why?
That sounds pretty narcissistic, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly was a victim mentality. Yeah. Tragically, she had just had some other losses in her own life, so it seemed like life was piling on. But this victim mentality that so many of us have, it's easy to understand how we could subject ourselves to it, because I'll say it this way, nobody ever really gets it together. Let me borrow that phrase from the 60s. Hey, Bill, how you doing? Oh, I'm getting it together. Bill, you're not getting it together, okay? Nobody has ever gotten their ducks in a row for more than a few seconds. Something always comes along. Have you noticed? I mean, are you aware of this? Wouldn't you give anything to be able to clean the house, organize your office, get the garage the way you finally want it to be, and have it stay that way? Or if we think of this as a metaphor, how about inside your head? Just to organize all of your thoughts. Everything in a place, everything nice and organized and neat, where everything is. Wouldn't that be great? Why are we never able to do that? Because that's the way life is. I think it's a false promise to suggest to somebody, and a false belief, if we buy into the suggestion, that somehow if we had enough money or enough status or prestige or we knew the right powerful and influential people,
then there'd never be any bad news.
That's right.
No way we could get bad news then.
That's right. We could get to a place that's held out by every advertisement you've ever seen.
That's right.
We could finally get to that place. Now I can be happy. I've been deferring my happiness until I got here.
Finally, no more problems, no more bad news.
I'm just going to bask in this problem-free existence. We need to give that up. The idea that you could ever get to that place, just give it up. And what can we do instead? See yourself as a problem-solving agent and work to become a better problem solver every day in every way, a little smarter, a little wiser, a little more sensitive, a little more clever. See the problem coming sooner than you would have, right? Till you get to the point where, whoa, I see this coming a mile away. I remember this. And maybe you can avoid a lot of the negative consequences of the problem, but it's still coming down the pike. It's still going to be a part of your life. And so rather than try to avoid problems or pursue this absurd idea that advertising is based on, buy our product, use our service, and you'll be problem-free. Forget it. It's not going to happen. But we can become better problem solvers, live life a little more gracefully, be more of an elegant problem solver when we see ourselves as agents of change.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the great Dylan line, he not busy being born is busy dying. I mean, there's always going to be a problem. You know, you're getting older, you're dealing with emotional changes, you're getting older, you're dealing with physical changes, you're getting older, you're dealing with all kinds of things going on. And just aging brings all kinds of problems along with it and lots of bad news. But let's stop at a moment and take a look at what is bad news. What makes news bad? You could say bad news, like look at the LA Times headlines, that's bad news. There's all kinds, most of the stuff in newspapers are bad news, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting informed of something personally that affects you in a negative way personally, that kind of bad news. Like somebody tells you something that makes your life somehow harder or worse or more challenging or whatever, something that really is a difficult situation to deal with. What makes it bad news? Well, it's because we judge that what we're about to go through is going to be a negative experience. But most of us, I think, would admit if we took a step back, once we got through it, we would see it as having been a positive experience. Like most of the bad stuff you've ever been through in your life, once you got on the other side of that bad stuff, it's like, boy, I'm glad that I went through that because now I'm better.
Or at least, how many times in our lives have we said, well, that wasn't as bad as I was afraid it was going to be.
Exactly. Every morning when my wife and I get up and she says, okay, time to go for our morning walk, a couple-mile walk, I'm thinking, I don't really want to do this. But, every time we come back at the end of the walk, I always feel like, boy, I'm glad it's over, but I'm sure glad I did that, And that's what happens a lot of times when we deal with the quote-unquote bad news we receive in our lives. We end up better. We end up stronger. I love that quote that, difficulty, adversity, the hard stuff is the diamond dust. That's what shines us up. The easy stuff, we don't build much muscle. It's dealing with the hard stuff where we build the muscle. So I guess, to me, the most important two things to consider in dealing with bad news is, number one, to be able to not go down the road of how could this get worse, not go down the road of worrying about all the negative consequences that could happen, not to never look there. It's just to not go down that road and stay down that road. You can worry once. That's a great idea. But to go down the road of how could this get worse and worrying about what makes it worse is what makes it worse. So what we need to do is, either go down that other road of, okay, this is a hard thing, but what can I do to make the best of the situation? Or ideally, train yourself to be able to step back, observe the situation from a mindful place where you're not tied up in the thoughts or the feelings, and from that experience, watch your thoughts and watch your feelings, and then come back in and choose your perception and your response.
Yeah, there's a story in Buddhism. And you got to remember, most people who call themselves Buddhists see this not as a religion, but a philosophy. Like the religion of Confucianism is more a collection of folk wisdom and a way to live your life than it is a religion as we think of it in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, those religions are very different than Eastern philosophy. You decide what's right and wrong. I'm not telling you. I'm just saying the philosophy of Buddhism, and I think Confucianism too, says the problem is in the judging that it's a problem. You just don't know. After receiving his enlightenment, Prince Siddhartha, who gave up everything, his kingdom, his crown and jewels and all of his worldly goods, to go out into the world to try to figure out how to end human suffering, after receiving his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he decided to spread the good news, to share this technique, which, if you want to think about it being other than religion, probably is closer to psychotherapy. And so he's going through the countryside of what is now Nepal and India, especially the northern regions, and he's teaching and preaching, and any time he encounters somebody that gives him some pushback, a little bit of argument, or maybe even stronger, tells him he's wrong, he's a heretic, he's a charlatan, whatever, a blasphemer, and an idolater, whatever, his response is always, could be, maybe, you might be right about that. Well, I can understand how you'd feel that way. Now, think about incorporating that into your life. What part of us do we have to tame or domesticate to learn when we encounter pushback not to go into fight or flight, not to get defensive, not to get our hackles up and start holding on, but to acknowledge, give them what they want. You don't need to agree with somebody or concede anything to go, yeah, that could be. That's far out. That might be. You never really know. I think there's great wisdom in that. Whoever gets credit for it, whether it's Buddha or Confucius or Lao Tzu, it's largely Eastern philosophy, but it's just a good part of mental health in all corners of the world now. Yet somehow it's sort of a veiled concept. A lot of people, it never occurs to them to offer that acknowledgement. And you know, a great place to begin to practice is in the home with your spouse or your kids or your parents. Next time they give you some pushback on something, tell you you're wrong, suggest you're an idiot, whatever, let them have it. I don't mean let them have it like let them have it, but give it to them. Say, yeah, it could be, might be, without any sarcasm. Or another nice way to say it, I can understand how you'd feel that way. Don't agree with you, but yeah, that makes sense. What have you lost? What have you given up? You see, you have given something called acknowledgement. You've made peace. I think in traffic we can do the same thing, not just at home, but in traffic. Somebody cuts you off. All right, they've already cut you off. What are you going to do? Many people go for the accelerator instead of the brake. How about take a breath, go for the brake. If they're going to drive like a maniac, give them the room to drive like a maniac. Just hold off, back up. Don't go after them. Don't allow that aggressive fight or flight animal instinct in you to take over. So this is a nice approach, I think, to dealing with bad news and dealing with people that are aggressive or hostile, is to find the power in not judging them, not judging their intention, and really not giving them the power to judge you. Just concede the point. Yeah, might be, could be. Try it out. I think you'll be impressed with how well it works.
It is a really remarkable skill to be able to do that. It's essentially putting yourself on the same side of the table as everybody and the problems on the other side of the table instead of you against the other person. That really changes everything. You know, and it's all perception. I mean, bad news really is perception. What's bad news? What's good news? What isn't perception, though, is autopilot. autopilot is, it's sort of set. It just does what it does. You're not choosing to perceive at this point. You're not choosing to take the time to have a perception. You're just going on autopilot. Like, for example, my mom, whenever she got bad news, her instinct was always to go, how is this going to get worse? But whenever she got good news, it was like, well, don't, get your hopes up too high. Don't let your go. So bad news, we go all the way in the left direction, but good news, we can't go very far in the right direction, which is why I'm exactly the opposite. We tend to be like our parents or unlike our parents. I'm just the opposite. I get good news. I think the world is going to become compassionate tomorrow. Everything's wonderful. I get bad news. Like, well, okay, how can I handle this? What's the best way? And I'm grateful for the reverse conditioning, if you will, that caused me to become so optimistic. But you take a look at yourself. Like on a 1 to 10, when you get bad news, how do you deal with it? Are you really happy with the way you deal with bad news, or you really don't like the way you deal with bad news? Well, in either case, you can do some making it better. You can do something to make your ability to deal with bad news better, if only just by imagining yourself as a person who is consistently getting better at dealing with bad news. The likelihood as you get older is there's going to be some more of this stuff coming along. Bad news, as we were saying, it's coming down the pike. Life is not problem-free. There's going to be all kinds of bad news coming down the pike. If you get better and better at handling bad news, then, well, maybe bad news won't be such bad news. I got some bad news, but you know what? The way I use bad news in such a positive way, I think, maybe makes me stronger. That doesn't kill me might, in fact, just make me stronger. Be someone who's really good at handling bad news.
I remember one of the times I interviewed Timothy Leary on the radio in the early 1980s. And in the middle of the interview, it just popped into my head to ask Timothy whether he was an optimist. And he looked at me like I just got off the spaceship from Mars, like I was some sort of alien. Like, what kind of question is that? And he said out loud, well, of course I'm an optimist. Paused for a beat and then added, what choice do I have? Well, that was a long time ago, and I still remember it. Of all the wise things and, well, many of the silly things that I heard Timothy say over the years, that really stuck for me. Yeah, of course I'm an optimist, but what choice do I have? In other words, that attitude is not happening in isolation. That attitude, your response to bad news, good news, or, as Steve said, a refusal just not to judge. I'm not sure. Looks like it might be bad news, but there may be a silver lining. Might be a blessing in disguise. You just don't know the outcome of the situation. So why not presume that if it's bad, if it really is bad, it'll get better, and if it's given a little bit of time, maybe it's not a bad thing at all. There's lots of stories we could use to illustrate this idea. But to presume that it's bad and going to get worse is to increase the likelihood that it will. We reap what we sow. We go where we look, and we do tend to get what we expect. We, in countless unconscious ways, contribute to the results, the outcomes in our lives. And so if, as Timothy Leary said, of course, what choice do I have? If I'm not an optimist, then I'm going to create this reality that a pessimist would expect the negative and therefore likely contribute to it, whereas the optimist is going to contribute to things getting better and a positive outcome. Now, you can't analyze this with a double-blind study because it's got so much psychology and philosophy. So I'm not talking about a pure case where all negative thinking makes things worse and all positive thinking makes it better. Don't do that to me. But there is a tendency. J.B. Ryan at Duke University in the 50s did work with card guessing and tossing dice, and they proved that even though chance is at work and you can have very little influence over the outcome, nevertheless, the pessimist did worse than chance by a few percentage points, and the optimist did a little better than chance. By a few percentage points, not that much, but nevertheless it made a difference. And then when we look at the quantum science, quantum mechanics, when you get down to these tiny little subatomic particles moving at the speed of light or close to it, we find that it's impossible to separate observation, belief, and expectation from the results of how these little particles behave. So we've got lots of scientific evidence that attitude plays some sort of role, not only psychological, but a real physical role in influencing the outcome. So be aware of that. If you're going to believe that the best way to avoid disappointment and create a positive outcome is to think negatively and expect the worst, you may want to reconsider that whole idea.
Yeah, because really, bad news is only bad news in the eyes of the person who's perceiving it. And optimists would see so many things not being bad news that a pessimist would see as being bad news. If the glass is half empty, to the pessimist, that's bad news. If the glass is half full, to the optimist, that's good news, So they look at the same thing and say, one says good news, one says bad news. So news is not objectively good or bad. Objectively, news is whatever you do with it. So, not to say, if somebody says, I'm about to torture you, waterboard you over and over again, this is not good news. No matter how you look at it, this is not good news.
Hard to find the silver lining in waterboarding.
It is. But that's a rather radical, example. And we can go the other way where, like, you've just won the lottery, people would say is good news. Although, if you look at the stories of people who've won the lottery, you might not think so, So good news, bad news. One of the things I found most fascinating is they did a study with people who won the lottery and other people who lost a limb. And the people who won their lottery, their happiness levels went way up, and the people who lost a limb, their happiness levels went way down. A year later, they were right back where they started again. Right back where they were before either of these events happened, because we do tend to just find our level, So if you're a pessimist, then more and more things are going to seem like bad news to you. If you're an optimist, less and less things will seem like bad news. More and more things will seem like good news. So that's what you can do. To me, pessimism is so terribly illogical. It's so illogical. And how do you know you're a pessimist? It seems to me a great way of judging is if you're getting sick and tired of what has never transpired. If you're getting tired of something and it hasn't even happened yet, but you've thought of it so many times, then you're worrying way too much. If you're already sick and tired, it hasn't even happened yet. So take a look at that and recognize the more you can look toward the optimism, towards seeing the glass filling rather than emptying, more than you can see what good can come of this. How can this adversity be turned into some kind of a benefit? The more you can do that, then the more of the world looks like good news instead of bad news. And that's really what we're talking about. Some things are obviously bad news and some things are obviously good news, but there's a lot of gray. And as you become more and more optimistic, that gray becomes a rainbow.
Wasn't it Mark Twain who said 98% of what I worry about never has happened and never will?
Yeah, something very similar.
Yeah, so there's wisdom in that. Why do we worry when the very act of worrying is only going to increase the likelihood that you're right? Life in many ways is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, again, John Milton's also right. No man is an island. We're an ocean. We are influenced by other people's behavior and their beliefs and their expectations as well. I think we're driving the boat. Our beliefs, our expectations and attitudes, as well as our behavior, obviously, has more influence than others. But attitude, this is a real factor in determining the outcome of a situation. So consider this whole idea that what if, generally speaking, life is always a self-fulfilling prophecy, that what you tend to believe, your belief system, what you tend to expect is going to color the outcome or influence. If you're negative, isn't it conceivable that you could unconsciously sabotage yourself? That the mind, by holding on to that negative thought, is targeting the negativity. If you're looking at what you want to avoid, you're going to have a problem avoiding it. You might have to work with that a little bit, but sometimes I call this the Sonny Bono effect, not to make fun of poor Sonny, but, he died skiing and smashed into a tree. God forbid this should happen to anybody, but I know exactly what happened. And a lot of people who ski and ski very well know what I'm talking about, or skateboarders. Motorcycle riders know this too, that you go where you look. So if Sonny Bono is like roaring down this mountain as fast as can be, and he comes out into a clearing, and there's just this one tree out there in the middle of the clearing, and he's fixated on the tree saying, "Oh no, oh my goodness, I don't want to hit that tree that I'm staring at." Tragically, no matter what you do, in terms of shifting your weight and throwing your hips out and digging a pole in on this side or that, it will be countermanded by the unconscious that is programmed for millions of years, literally, from our ancestors to go where you look. And so what do you do in a situation like that? You have to look at what you do want rather than look at what you're trying to avoid. What most people call goals is what they don't want. Often they can't tell you what they do want, but they'll say, well, I don't want this, and whatever happens, I don't want that, and I'm keeping my eye on avoiding what I don't want. Funny thing is, they keep cropping up. I think it's time for you to think about that. How much of the bad news that you're judging as bad news is born of your fears about it being bad news? I think we got to look at this idea of life, at least in part, being a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So part of it is what is bad news, and that's how you look at it. So becoming a person who is really good at dealing with bad news, and also a person who sees news not automatically as bad. Like seeing, well, this is news. It might be good. It might be good and bad. Maybe it'll be a little bit more good than who knows what's going to happen. And that's really a great attitude to have. Whenever news comes in, it's like, all right, all I know is I'm going to do the best with this. I don't know what's going to happen. The future is still up in the air. So instead of like deciding that this is terrible news and it's going to lead to these even more terrible things, program your mind to look at bad news as deep breath, calm, relax, no need for strength or speed, don't need fight or flight here. Deep breath now. What's the best I can do right now with this information? And then I can start looking at, in the big picture, how can this serve me? Where's the silver lining? Where's the blessing in disguise? Optimists find the beauty in even the things that seem at first to be not beautiful. And that's what you need to learn how to do. That is, there's a silver lining, there's a blessing in disguise, there's something good. The adversity will do something wonderful for you if you allow it to. And that means seeing it from an upbeat, positive, optimistic point of view. Anything this side of waterboarding, I think we can really do something real positive with.
And again, we're here to tell you that having studied in a comparative way many religions and many philosophies and the essence of psychology from cultures all around the world from time out of mind, this is a really fundamental understanding. This is a core belief, this idea that as often as possible, don't judge anything as good or bad. Just see it as it is. I mean, what happens when you decide immediately that this bad news is bad? Sure looks bad, smells bad, it's acting bad. Last time I saw it, it sure was bad. I'm afraid this is bad. Well, we've already talked about looking at what you're trying to avoid, and the chances are that you're going to move right toward it. But do you also see how it takes you away from the moment itself? The only thing that's real is what's happening right now. The past and future is never real. The past and future, where, I'm sorry, most people tend to live their whole lives distracted from the reality of the present moment, right here, right now, by an imagination of the past. That's what memory is. Memory is imagining that you're still there or that you could be there. It's bringing to mind through the imagination a recollection, to recall.
Which isn't usually totally accurate, by the way. Most memory is not exactly the way it happened.
Well, it's always colored.
Colored by your imagination, and you're remembering the last time you remembered it as well. So not just the original happening.
That's very important. Gore Vidal was the first person I ever heard say that. He said, when you remember something throughout your life, every time it comes to mind, you're only remembering the last time you thought of it, not the original incident. And so, like that party game, telephone line or party line or whatever, it morphs, it changes over the years. Sometimes you'll see that with your friends. Every time the fisherman tells the story, the fish literally gets a little bit bigger. He's not lying. That's the way he remembers it. It was really that big, honest. Or we get pulled off into the future. Our fears that this past that we just made up and imagined, yeah, it's based on something that happened, but it's your imagination that allows for memory. Same thing with the future. In other words, we're distracted from the only thing that's real. And to avoid that, to stay in the moment, to stay focused right here, right now, and experience the full richness of the moment, the masters, the wisest women and men of the world agree. We need to stop judging whether something is good or bad, right or wrong, on our side or opposed. Now, that doesn't mean you never arrive at a decision. We're talking about those immediate, instantaneous snap judgments, all right? You can, in time, of course, decide if this is something you want to pursue or you want to modify your approach to this problem or that problem. But you take your time, allow that moment to unfold. Allow this situation to develop itself a little bit. Cultivate. It's like letting the bread rise before you bake it. Cultivate some patience and watch your thoughts about this. And what are they doing? Watch them go to the negative. Watch them swing back to the positive like a pendulum. Watch your emotions and how they unfold. Emotions throughout the ages have been described as fluidic or mercurial because they keep changing, like going down the river. It's, oh, here's the rapids, the white water, hold on. And then you come around a corner and it's nice and slow and these quiet pools off to the side. But you know it's going to be fast again, just downstream a little bit. Your emotions are just like that. So instead of being a victim of all of that, account for it, anticipate it. My thoughts about this are going to go through an ebb and a flow. My feelings about this are going to go through an ebb and a flow. And rather than deciding right now, immediately, based on regrets from the past and fears of the future, instead of doing that judging right now, breathe, relax, tell yourself you're safe, and watch the development of those thoughts and feelings free from any judgment whatsoever.
And you can use this in almost any circumstance. I mean, once the brain has gone past, is this dangerous or not? Is this clear and present danger? Is there a need for a fight or flight reaction right now? And once it gets that there isn't, then there's no other circumstance that doesn't warrant a deep breath. There's no other circumstance, if you don't need to take instant reaction to clear life-threatening danger, there's no other circumstance that wouldn't behoove you to take the 1 or 2 seconds it takes to take a deep breath and to disconnect from your knee-jerk response and move into, actually more a knee-jerk reaction, I guess, and move into a thought-through response. Examine the situation and, from my best perspective, choose the most appropriate response. Any situation that doesn't involve a knee-jerk reaction, that doesn't involve running or hitting, serves you to take that moment, step back, as Michael was talking about, explore. Notice where your thoughts are going. Notice where your feelings are going. Let them go there. Don't change them. Just let them go there. Watch them. And then after that input, without being your thoughts or being your feelings, just you're the observer of those thoughts and feelings, you're in a way better situation to be able to decide, what am I going to do with this news? It might not even seem like bad news anymore once you do that.
So let's do an audio journey, a visualization and meditation, a guided imagery exercise, focused passion in paradise, we call it. And we'll practice this whole idea of not judging, at least not right away. Just allowing the situation to flow, stay in the moment, and see what happens when you practice postponing your judgment of something is good or bad, even if it looks obviously bad. Steve's absolutely right. If it's really dangerous, you'll react. You'll jump. You'll leap out of the way. It's very likely that you'll take an appropriate evasive action without even thinking about it. And yet we're talking about the 99.9% of the time that the danger is not real. It's just a fear born of your imagination that this might be dangerous, that this might be negative. It sure looks like bad news. Well, let's watch it for a second, or a minute, or a day, or more before we arrive at any conclusions here. I think you'll find the wisdom in that. Let's practice doing that. Get in a nice, comfortable position right now and close your eyes. A couple of shoulder shrugs and some head rolls, and then with your shoulders back and down and your rib cage open, balance your head on your neck and shoulders. Feel balanced throughout the core of your being. And take a few nice, slow, deep breaths. Especially as you exhale, create and sense a feeling of relaxation.
You sense it in your body, and you sense it in your mind. There's a sense of relaxation. Just look, and you'll find it getting deeper and more profound. Relaxing with every breath, relaxing with every sound. And you find yourself in paradise, where the air is clean and it feels real nice, and you feel safe, and your mind is clear, because paradise is full of love, and paradise is free of fear. So find yourself here, in a peaceful place, a calm, serene, and tranquil space, where you feel safe and you feel free to be.
Another word for mindfulness is equanimity, and it suggests balance. Neither left nor right, forward or back. Find the balance point. Bad news or a surprise that you don't yet know whether it's good or bad, it just knocks you off balance, is an opportunity to bring yourself back to balance. How do you do that? Well, it's really a feeling inside to be balanced. To be balanced is to suggest to yourself, to remind yourself that we're often too quick to judge, and we don't need to do that because that could take us out of balance, too far this way or that. Same thing happens when we allow ourselves to be knocked off center by an emotional feeling, a reaction. And again, you'll feel yourself off balance. What do? You take a breath and relax, as you're doing right now, feeling very safe, and simply center yourself over the feeling of being balanced, right in the middle. You know, there's magic in the middle. If you think about a turntable revolving, like a merry-go-round or one of those rides in the carnival, it's fastest on the outside. If we just bring to mind a record player and you think of an ant walking toward the edge of the record, though it's revolving at a constant rate, the closer the ant gets to the edge of the record, the faster and the faster and the faster it's going to go through space. If it turns and moves toward the center, toward the point of balance, things go slower and slower and slower and slower until at some infinitesimally small point, a point of balance, of equanimity in the very center of that revolving disk, there is peace. It is still. All of this motion, all of this chaos revolving in every case around a point, a center that is absolutely still. This is mindfulness. This is equanimity. This is what it means to be balanced or centered, is to find that single still point, a feeling really, more than anything, just a feeling to be trusted. Balance yourself, center yourself with a breath, a letting go feeling, and a refusal to judge prematurely.
So when you experience what feels like bad news, that's the moment you get to choose to step back and feel the peace, and let all those reactions simply release, and you can choose how to see what's coming and what will be. So instead of automatically assuming the worst, instead of going there initially first, what you do is you take a breath, step back, feel the peace, let the desire to make a fast decision release, and know that you've got time to explore your mind, explore your heart before you start. No judgment necessary, no danger here. Time to relax and become even more clear, and release the fear and see what's really here. So with news, good, bad, you choose. In either case, find the peace. Take a step back and release the initial desire to automatically jump, and give yourself a chance to relax till you're over the hump, till you're past that place where you're going to knee-jerk react, where now what you can do, in fact, is explore all the possibilities and then choose the most effective and efficient and elegant way that you choose to use.
This is wisdom. Congratulate yourself. Give yourself a pat on the back. Tell yourself this will be easy to remember, and you're going to get better and better at remembering that it's important to suspend judgment, to give yourself some time to find your balance point and use mindfulness and equanimity to remain centered and balanced. A feeling you can easily bring with you now back into the room as you bring to mind what you'll see in a moment when you open your eyes, remember where you are. Take a nice, slow, deep breath. Fill your lungs with strength and power. Hold for a moment as you peak, and as you exhale, open your eyes now, wide awake and alert, back in the room, feeling all rested and refreshed, balanced, centered. Come see, come saw, what will be, will be. Better than before.
Better than before. You know, I heard you use the word equanimity, not a word that we've used, I think, much before, and it just sort of evoked in me this, I got this picture of like a painting in a museum that was like one of those pastoral scenes, you know, with maybe a couple of people way in the distance on a blanket or something like that with the cheese, but it looks so peaceful, and I just, wow, that's such a lovely word, equanimity. It's like everything's, all the plates are going, you know, none of the plates are wobbling, you know, equanimity, very nice, and a great goal as a place to go when you receive good news or bad news.
Yeah, that's one of the words you come across when you really explore what often is called esoteric philosophy. But, you know, I think that word esoteric is so off-putting. What is esoteric about anything that has a practical benefit in your life? You know, it's just common sense that may not be all that common. I think most of so-called common sense is no longer common. Somehow we lost it. I
don't know if it ever was.
We paved it over or something.
I don't know if common sense was ever common.
Well, maybe it's just a product of living a good long life and the wisdom that comes with experience and age. You and I have both talked about, actually, the way in which older people are revered in the Hawaiian culture. And it's baffling to me, since everybody is getting older, why in the United States mainland and most of Europe there's this cultural thing about, youth is better than being older. My God, I'm so glad I don't have to make all those same mistakes again. And all those awkward situations. No, I wouldn't want to go back.
Not a chance. Robert Browning said it so beautifully to his wife, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. He said, "Grow old with me. The best of life is yet to come, the last for which the first was made."
Nice. Yeah, that's evolution. That's really what it's all about. Standing on the shoulders of giants, of your own personal experience, and then why not read what other people have said about their experience and learn from that. Hey, thanks for being with us. Join us next week as our series, Finding Yourself in Paradise, continues. Personal empowerment, human potential, personal and spiritual growth in a variety of topics. But you're probably recognizing the golden thread that runs through all of these different topics is the wonderful benefits that accrue when you use focused passion, this narrow awake, this alpha brainwave level between awake and asleep. So continue to practice that every day. Set aside 10 or 15 minutes at least once a day. If you can't do that, how about 1 or 2 minutes many times throughout the day? Supplement awake and asleep with the balance point in this regard as well, and you'll see the benefits accrue, no doubt about it. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.